Here we go, and we're live. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. Tonight, Randy and I are going to be talking about Randy's favorite topic, forward-facing sonar, Garmin Livescope, stuff like that. Hopefully, you guys are going to get a lot of great information about this. There's a lot of tournaments recently that have been happening both in Florida as well as now the Major League Fishing tournament over on Lake Eufaula in Alabama. And a lot of guys have been using forward-facing sonar, a lot of guys haven't. And we kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, first, how the Livescope has impacted professional tournament fishing, at least in these first two tournaments, after these guys have had some time to get used to using it. We also want to talk about maybe the best situations to use Livescope, maybe the situations you don't need Livescope, and which fishermen actually need to go out and spend the money on it and which ones don't. Hopefully it'll be a really informative stream. Randy, how's it going tonight?
Doing good, Johnny, man. I just, this whole Livescope deal, I'm sort of obsessed by it because, everybody sort of knows how I feel about it. I've got really mixed feelings about it. And then, I've been doing a lot of those fish the moment on the water lessons all winter long. And at Table Rock Lake, and everybody on Table Rock Lake is using that thing except me. So I'm always wondering, am I missing out on this thing? And then I get the information from you, and I see you catching all these giants using Livescope all winter long. So it's, I think about this Livescope all the time. So it's going to be an interesting discussion tonight.
For sure, and hopefully we're going to ease some concerns about Livescope, maybe help some people out who have Livescope, things like that, and we're going to try to keep it balanced. Obviously, having Randy on, who's basically very few electronics, and then myself, I have everything, so we'll be able to give you a really good mixed perspective on this tonight. So the first thing I want to start talking about tonight, Randy, is some of the recent tournament results that we've seen with guys both using the Livescope and not using the Livescope. The most recent example is actually from the last couple days during the Red Crest for the Major League Bass Fishing or Major League Fishing Tour on Lake Eufaula in Alabama. It was really interesting because the first day of the tournament was yesterday, and Brian Thrift jumped out to a huge lead. And Brian Thrift personally is my favorite fisherman in terms of fishing style. I love the way he fishes, and he actually does not have a Garmin Livescope on the boat. He just runs Humminbird 360 imaging, and he doesn't even have spot lock on his boat. He actually runs a 4-Trex trolling motor, so no spot lock, 360 imaging, a little bit old school, but he dominated fishing offshore when a lot of guys were struggling to even put a fish in the boat. And then you have on the other side Jacob Wheeler, who actually won the last Major League Fishing event on Lake Eufaula, same conditions, kind of pre-spawn conditions, won it offshore using a combination of 360 and Livescope, and he actually really struggled the first day, only catching 2 fish for 9 pounds. He got some good ones, but in an interview he did this morning that I was listening to, he said, Jacob Wheeler said that he actually was hurt by his Livescope during the first day of the tournament. He was seeing a lot of fish offshore moving around, and he was not able to get those fish to bite. The 2 fish he did catch was on a football jig. So when he threw the football jig in those areas, he was able to get some really good bites. However, the rest of the day when he was using moving baits trying to find fish, he wasn't able to get a bite. And I actually made a video about this exact topic just a couple weeks ago, talking about the difference between stationary fish and migratory fish, and how Livescope can actually cause you to chase inactive migratory bass. And that's exactly what happened on Lake Eufaula. Brian Thrift was focused using just his 360 imaging, fishing specific targets, brush piles, offshore rock piles, things like that. And he caught a lot of really good fish on swim baits, shaky heads, jigs, things like that. Jacob, on the other hand, got caught up in using the Livescope and chasing around these fish that were roaming around on offshore structure, and he didn't dial into a very specific piece of cover like Brian did. However, on day 2, Jacob completely switched his strategy. He basically stopped relying on his Livescope as much, focused more on just targeting specific targets with the 360 imaging, and he ended up catching pretty good weights and finished up in the top 10, top 12 in the tournament and made the cut. So it's just really fascinating to me that Brian is able to go out there, Brian Thrift is able to go out there and just use 360 and catch fish when everyone else has Livescope, and he could have Livescope. He could run Livescope if he wanted to, but he just doesn't. He just relies on 360, and it lines up with what I talked about in that last video. I want to get your opinion on all that, Randy, now that I've kind of laid that all out to everyone.
Well, you know what this reminds me of, Johnny, a lot. I see a lot of parallels with the Livescope and the Alabama rig, and this is what I'm talking about. I remember back when the Alabama rig was legal on like the FLW
Mm,
tour, there was like a 2 year period where it was legal in the tournaments, and basically, if you didn't throw the thing in the pre-spawn, you couldn't win. It was impossible to win. So what happened is every single tournament we go to, it's like you didn't even throw anything else except the Alabama rig. You had to fish in practice. You had to figure it out. But what happened is you spent so much time throwing this Alabama rig, and
mm.
there's maybe 10% of the guys caught fish on the Alabama rig. Everybody else struggled with it, even though they felt they needed to be using it. And I see the same parallel with the live scope now, and that's a great example with Thrift and Wheeler on there. It's like, when do you know? When do you know to turn the thing off? When do you know to keep the thing on? And I think the big discussion that needs to be had is there's going to have to be a way that anglers can discern that. And that's something that it's so new that everybody's still learning about it. And, you know, I, you're, I'm going to take the lead on this. You're the expert on this. What's your opinion on that?
Now, I have at least based on my experience, I've kind of created a little list here of the times when I found that Livescope is super helpful and when Livescope is not that helpful and actually can hurt you. And that's something that's really key to think about, guys, is Livescope can actually hurt you more than help you in a lot of situations, to the point where you can actually go out and catch less fish because you have a Livescope on your boat than if you didn't, because when you're out there with the Livescope, you can see everything. That's the great thing about Garmin Livescope. You can see all the fish, you can see every piece of cover, everything out there. But if those fish are not actively feeding, it's very tough to get those fish to actually bite because they're in an inactive mode. They're just kind of floating around, swimming around. The fish that are active are very easy to catch on the live scope. You kind of have to figure out the right retrieve or the bait to get them to fire. I've made a video about that on my channel already where I'm catching a bunch of big fish with a 6-inch swim bait when those fish were schooled up on shad out in the middle of a lake. But when those fish are not doing that, it's almost impossible to catch them on the live scope. And I actually had another day, which is a complete opposite, where I was out on the lake graphing around. I tried to use the live scope for 3 hours, never got a bite. I then was like, okay, I'm done with this live scope deal. I'm sick of it. I turned it off and I just turned on my 360 imaging and started graphing hard structure and cover, brush piles, rock piles, ledges, stuff like that. The first brush pile I pull up on, I found some fish in the brush pile with my down imaging. I found the brush pile on the side imaging, fired a jerkbait over the top of that brush pile, boom, caught a 2.5 pounder. Awesome. Didn't even use the live scope. Went to the next brush pile, threw a football jig in there, catch a 7 pounder. And this is all within 30, 40 minutes of turning off the live scope and going back to traditional techniques. What happened was that those fish were in an inactive state. And you could see them all over the graph and all on the live scope. And I was following them around in a circle in the middle of the lake. But for whatever reason, they weren't set up in a way that they would actually bite. However, those fish that were positioned on hard cover and structure, those brush piles, things like that, that were in the shade of brush, those fish were in an ambush mode. They were ambushing fish and bait fish that were coming by. So when I brought my jig by, they were actually in the mood to eat, and I was able to catch those fish. And basically, I went out the next day and caught a 6, a 5, a 4, all in that same lake, fish and brush piles, never turned the live scope on, didn't even use it, didn't matter. And I was doing better without the live scope. So those are just 2 recent examples. And again, we're going to get into some lists of when it works, when it doesn't. And I'll show you guys some sonar recordings, stuff like that. But what are your thoughts on all that, Randy?
Well, I got a question for you, Johnny, on this, like here, because we're talking. This brings up. It just came to my mind about a question about bass behavior. Now, we know the things that generate bass to strike a lure, and very seldom it's just out of hunger. Most of the time, it's curiosity, competition, reflex, just a mistake. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons bass strike a lure. So when you're dealing with, say, you find fish roaming, chasing shad out in the middle of the lake, like where you caught all those big giants a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
And those fish are not relating to any type of structure. They're just basically roaming like stripers following bait. And then you have those bass, like you said, that are set up on cover, on hard cover, brush piles, breaks, that type of stuff. To me, it seems like if you're fishing hard structure, like thrift fishing brush piles or breaks or whatever like that, and you bring that bait past a piece of cover at the right angle, you're going to capitalize on that reaction strike from the bass. That bass is going to hit that bait out of competition or out of reflex.
Yep.
But if you're dealing with live scope fish and you're dealing with these fish that are chasing shad, I don't think that you don't have that reflex strike when you're dealing with those fish that are chasing shad. I mean, so are we dealing with two different types of personalities of fish here? I mean, do you think that those fish that are live scope, Roman, open water fish, do you think they just have a different personality than target structure oriented fish?
They do 100%. They have a different personality, and it's interesting because when you follow those fish around with Livescope, one of the guys over at the Bass Tank, John Sukup, he's actually fishing the National Professional Fishing League. I know that's a mouthful, but he's over there, and he is one of the best Livescope fishermen in the country, and he's so good and dialed in at when those fish are on that Livescope, he can go catch them. But he also knows when to stop fishing for those fish that are on the Livescope. And we'll kind of get into some situations where it works here. I think that's a good segue. So, one thing I want to talk about is just when does Livescope actually work? And you'll actually see some Sonar recordings and stuff I'm going to show. It'll make sense kind of what I'm talking about. The number one time when Livescope actually works, Randy, for what I see, is that those fish are actively feeding on shad, and they're related to shad, not to the bottom. So let me share my screen here, and you guys can kind of see exactly what I'm talking about with that, because it's kind of fascinating. If we pull up the screen, what you'll see here is an image from my Livescope, and this was on a hot water lake. It was a lake over here in Arkansas, warm water discharge lake, and these bass were chasing big schools of gizzard shad out in the middle of the lake. And if we just kind of look at this image, you can see some shad here in the center of the screen, these big balls of shad, and then you can see here all these bright light bulbs. Boom, those light bulbs are on. Those are your fish. You can see them very, very clearly, and that is a group of 7 to 10 giant fish, 4 to 6 pounders. One of the fish we caught out there was like a 9 pounder. I didn't catch it, but one of my buddies did. And so there's big fish on these bait balls. And whenever those fish are right underneath the bait fish, and those bait fish are high in the water column, those bass will get really aggressive and they will eat. And you can catch those fish, but the problem is that you have to really trigger them in a very specific way. So for example, in this situation, I actually caught one of these fish, and you can kind of see the bass disappear. And what I did is I brought a swim bait right over the top of those fish's head, burned it, and then stopped it and let it fall and killed it through those fish. And something about a big 6-inch swim bait falling through those fish would trigger them to bite. Earlier in the year, we were catching them on big 8-inch flutter spoons doing this. So you would throw a flutter spoon, reel it up 5 feet from the surface, and let a big flutter spoon fall down through those fish, and those fish would eat it. Sometimes we were on Grand Lake, Randy, and we were catching them on Alabama rig in October, fishing really deep, and the only way I could get them to bite was on an Alabama rig. But in every single situation, those fish were chasing bait fish in the water column, and the bass were tight to those bait fish. And that doesn't happen on every single lake, and it doesn't happen in every single situation. Usually it helps when you have clear water. So whenever you have, let's say, 3 to 10 foot of water visibility, those bass are a lot more likely to get really focused on feeding on those shad. And they'll do it in open water. They'll feed on shad a lot of times on the top of ledges and structure and stuff like that. But in that situation, you don't really need the Livescope, because you can just graph the ledge or the point with your fish finder, your side imaging, down imaging, see those fish. And when they're related to the bottom, it's very easy to just cast on that same spot over and over again. So if I kind of pull up a Navionics just to kind of give you guys an idea of this, for example, if we're out here on Grand Lake, this was one of the places where I was catching them doing this, when those fish are related right on hard structure, like a point like this, for example. Let me find a better point that's a little bit clearer to see. So right here. So when those fish are related to like a hard point like this, that hard piece of structure, that hard point that sticks out, those fish are a lot easier to catch on regular offshore baits. Let me transition over here. See, there we go. So you can go right here, and the bass are positioned right on that point. And when they're up on top of the point, up on top of shallower water, they're much easier to catch because they're related to the bottom of the lake. And they'll be in, like, let's say 10 to 15 feet of water, 20 feet of water, and you can catch them on deep diving crankbaits, football jigs, Carolina rigs, stuff like that. However, when those fish get further out in the middle of the lake, over this channel or over in this channel, over 80, 90, 100 feet of water, those fish are no longer related to the bottom. They're related to nothing, just the bait fish. And they'll just swim around here randomly. The only way you can get those fish to bite then is by following them around with the Livescope and actually using the Livescope to see the bass under the bait and catching them. And you're basically just randomly driving around with your trolling motor out here until you see the bait fish and you make your cast. Now, in general, those fish that are randomly roaming around here are a lot tougher and a lot less consistent to catch, because when they're out here randomly chasing, 1 minute they could be here, the next minute they're over here, or over here. They can move hundreds of yards at times. And I followed one school of fish on one school of bait 100 yards before around the lake. But when those fish are positioned on top of structure and cover, they're a lot easier to catch because there's just on one sweet spot, one brush pile, one rock pile, one shell bed, a hard spot, whatever it is. And that's when those fish are a lot more consistent. So for a tournament angler, Livescope is super inconsistent because from day to day, it might take you a couple hours to even relocate that school of bass because it's just randomly swimming. Where when those fish are positioned on a point or a ledge or something like that, those fish will stay there for 2, 3, 4 days in a row, and you can repeat that over and over again. Now, whenever you get into dirtier water situations, you'll find that those fish are less likely to suspend and roam. And when you get to clearer water situations, those bass are more likely to roam. So one situation that I find is whenever there's a lot of bait fish in your lake, gizzard shad, threadfin shad, and you have super clear water, 4 to 10 foot of visibility, there are times of the year, like the late summer, the fall, and even in the winter, where those bass will suspend and chase on bait fish, and one of the best ways to catch them is using that Livescope to follow them around, because they're not that difficult to track down in a lot of those deep, clear lakes. So that's kind of the first situation. What are your thoughts on that, Randy?
Okay, again, I've got a lot of questions here because, because this technology is new to me. Okay, let's apply this to a tournament scenario. Say the areas that you just described. Say you go out there and practice, and you find 2 or 3 groups of these bass chasing these shad, and they're just randomly roaming out. Some of them maybe they're roaming off secondary points. Maybe you found some submerged timber off the ends or the sides of points, and you find these fish out there. Okay, you go back there the next day of the tournament, and what if these fish aren't there? At that point, do you just spend the rest of your time just graphing and idling around out there roaming in the middle? Because I'm always I've got everything through a filter of tournament fishing.
Yep.
So if I look at this technique and this technology in terms of a potential tournament situation, to me, it seems like those fish are like ghost fish a lot of times out there. And it looks like it would be really a good technique or a good way to fish if you just were out there fishing for fun and you didn't have time against your side. But in a tournament scenario, what do you do if you can't pick those fish up again out there?
One story I can give you is from John over at the Bass Tank. He actually fished an ABA tournament, or maybe it was a Federation National Championship, I think actually a regional championship on Toledo Bend Reservoir. So I'll pull up Toledo Bend really quick just to kind of give you guys an example of that. And I've been trying to learn as much about the Livescope as I can for you guys so I can share all this info. And one thing that he was doing, if we kind of transition over here again, he was going around and on Toledo Bend, and I don't know the exact creeks he was in or anything like that, but he was in some of these creeks and he was finding fish with his regular electronics, 2D sonar, side imaging. He wasn't using Livescope to find the fish. And that's one big thing you have to remember, guys. Whenever we're finding these fish offshore, we're not finding them with the Livescope. I find them by graphing around with my side imaging, my down imaging, 2D sonar to find the fish first. Then I follow them with the Livescope. It's a combo of both. If you don't know how to use your down imaging and side imaging first, you're never going to be able to find the fish to even catch them with the Livescope. So you need to learn how to use your traditional 2D sonar, down imaging, side imaging, stuff like that first to find them. And I've talked about that in that Livescope video I made. But basically, he was finding these bait fish in some of these main channels and kind of going back into some of these creeks, and there was a bunch of bait fish roaming around. And in practice, he said he had one day in practice, he had 28 pounds. The next day, he had 25 pounds. He thought he was going to blow this tournament away. This was like in October, and it was tough. Fishing was tough. And those fish were roaming on bait out here. Well, he went back the next day, and the wind shifted directions. And the wind was blowing from the south 2 days, and then it started blowing from the north. When it started blowing from the north, what happened is that the bait fish changed position and it changed the way the bass were related to them, and he didn't understand exactly how to find them in that time. So he spent like 4 or 5 hours graphing around trying to relocate these schools of fish and just never was able to find them. He ended up catching 1 3-pounder the first day, and then the last like 2 hours or last like hour of the tournament, he ran shallow somewhere and went to like a backup pattern, caught 2 3-pound fish, and salvaged his day with 9 pounds. He went out the next day and he relocated that school of fish for like a minute. And he kind of got on him, and he caught 2 4-pounders, and then the wind got too strong. He couldn't even fish out there, and he wasn't able to stay with them. He then went back up shallow, finished up his limit, and he finished like 6th in that tournament. So he did really well, but he had to combine the Livescope fish with the shallow fish. But he said if he had been able to catch those Livescope fish in the tournament, he would have blown it away. Same exact thing happened a couple weeks ago on another ABA tournament he fished. Same exact thing happened. He found a bunch of fish offshore on the Livescope. Come tournament day, he struggled to get him to bite. He was catching giant bags in practice. When he came back tournament day, he actually had to scrap it, go up shallow with a jerkbait, and he was actually in like 2nd place after the first day of the tournament. He caught 2 of his fish with the Livescope out here deep, and then 3 of his fish up shallow. And then the second day of the tournament, he just scrapped the Livescope fish, went up shallow, caught 19 pounds, and he was able to mix the shallow and the deep. But that's really tricky to do, and he's a really good angler, so he's able to do that. But to answer your question, Randy, the consistency of that Livescope is so hard because you may have to spend 4 or 5 hours of your day just graphing around and relocating those fish if they're not related to a specific target, and that can make it really, really tough to catch those fish.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest learning curve that you have with that particular technology. I mean, and it's still so new. I think people right now, they still see it as a novelty and almost like a toy.
Yeah.
Because I'm just seeing the guys I observe and how they use this Livescope. They're basically just running and they're shutting down in the middle of these ditches, in the middle of these guts in the winter, and they're just trolling around randomly.
Yep.
And yeah, why that is fun. I mean, who can deny the fact that if you see a group of fish out there, and you see the fish coming after your bait, I mean, that's going to be addictive to a sense. But I think what happens is that addiction to that rush of that technology, just like what Jacob Wheeler's talking about, it's eventually going to come back and bite you. Your other skills are going to begin to atrophy a little bit. So this is morphing right now. I mean, this whole Livescope forward-facing technology, I mean, it's something that's constantly changing as far as knowing when to use it, knowing when to not use it. And another example is like, let's talk about grass lakes again. When you're dealing with these offshore open water bass fields of grass, whether it be in Texas, Florida, TVA lakes. I mean, how do you see it applying to the grass lake situation in open water?
I mean, with the grass lakes, the one thing I'll say is if you're fishing on any lake with smallmouth, that's the second situation where the Livescope is just dominant. So on a lot of lakes up north, guys, if you have grass in your lakes, and I'll go to an example of one of the lakes up in Wisconsin I used to fish, there are grass lakes that have those smallmouth bass. And actually, a really great example is I'm going to go over to here to Lake Cayuga. I'm not sharing my screen, guys. I know I'll pull it up here in a second. I just need to pull up Cayuga. Cayuga is a lake up in upstate New York where a lot of bass fishing tournaments are fished. And a lot of guys catch fish on Cayuga, fishing up on the northern end of the lake, as well as kind of on the midsection fishing offshore grass. And in those situations, I don't feel like the Livescopes can be that useful because those fish are related in and around the grass. You can't really pick out those fish with the Livescope very well in the grass because there's so much interference with all the grass. You won't be able to pick out the fish very easily. And what happens is that usually in that situation, like a 360 imaging is going to be way more effective because a 360 imaging will allow you to see where the grass lines end, see holes in the grass, all that stuff. However, down the lower end of the lake here on Cayuga, there's a bunch of big smallmouth. And in the summertime, a lot of these smallmouth, what they'll do is they will get out of these flat areas and get out over here over this really deep water on these glacier lakes, these deep lakes. And there's grass up on these flats, but there's giant smallmouth out here. And they'll get on schools of alewife and perch and chase them around. And with that Livescope, you can actually chase those schools of smallmouth around an area. And there are times when, if you can kind of understand the general area where those smallmouth are, and same thing with largemouth, if you have, like, let's say a two football field size area, and you kind of know the general zone where those smallmouth are living, you can follow them around with your live scope and catch those fish. And guys have done that actually with the 360 imaging even, and done really well in tournaments. I think, I don't know if it was Brandon Polnick or someone like that, won a tournament recently doing that on either the Elite Series or Major League Fishing Tour, following fish around with the 360 on rock piles. And you can do that with 360, and I'll make a video explaining that too here, guys. So you don't just, it's not something you can just do with Livescope, but Livescope makes it more efficient. But that's a situation, anytime you have smallmouth here, or even on like the Great Lakes over here, whatever Great Lakes you're fishing, it doesn't really matter. Like even if you're over here on St. Clair, even on these big open flats and stuff like that, those smallmouth will roam a lot more. And so you'll have to use that live scope. You can kind of use it to dial the fish in, rather than just randomly drifting out here in the open. So that's really helpful. And even on lakes down south, Randy, like where I fish and you fish on like Table Rock, smallmouth are very easy to catch now on Table Rock in certain situations, because usually in the summer on southern impoundments with smallmouth, those fish roam, the smallmouth roam a lot during the middle of the day, and they won't pull up onto hard structure until the nighttime. But now you can actually find a lot of those suspended schooling smallmouth out in the middle of nowhere, basically, with the live scope and catch them. Can you consistently find them? That's the challenge, because the bait fish and the fish move every day. It's not like you find them right here in the middle of this gut for whatever reason in your practice day and that they'll be right there the next day. A lot of times they'll move all the way out. They might move all the way over to this gut. They can swim a huge distance following those shad, both smallmouth and largemouth at times, and that makes it really unpredictable. But if you have the stomach, if you have the guts, I guess, to graph around during the tournament and relocate those fish, you can do really well, and you can get well in a hurry. So that's kind of my thought there.
Yeah, and that right there is the biggest factor in this whole conversation what we're having, because I'll take somebody like myself, for example. If I got a live scope and put it on my boat, and I went out there and I spent a couple hours using the thing, and I couldn't pick up any fish with it, I'm going to be back on the bank. I mean, I'm not gonna have that confidence to stay with it all day long. The same like what we're talking about Alabama rig fishing, about those guys that catch them on it are the ones that pick it up in the morning and they don't put it down until the end of the day. They go through a lull, they don't try something else. So just the way that I see it on this entire live scope deal, it's a commitment. And not only it's a commitment, it's going to be like a feast or famine thing when you apply it to tournament situations.
Yep.
One situation that I can see where it would be just unbelievable. Let's take Lake St. Clair again, for example, those northern smallmouth natural lakes.
Yep.
When you get out on those vast flats where you have a lot of broken rock and you've got sections that have boulders, you can actually look down in the water and see, you know, those smallmouth are there. You know, they're roaming those flats with the broken boulder rock on there. If you look at them and you say you make a long cast with a jerkbait or topwater or whatever, and you see these fish chasing the bait but not biting it, at that point, how do you capitalize on that knowledge, knowing those fish are right there around your bait? I mean, is it, you think you go to a different bait, different color to retrieve if they're not biting it?
So
that's to me when I would use it more than anything else.
I've found that bait selection with Livescope is really critical, and that's something you can learn really well. Like, for example, when I was on that one, a hot water lake, in the morning, I had to catch them on a 3-inch tiny swim bait and fish like really deep, 30 feet of water to get those fish to bite, because those fish were really deep on the shad. Later in the day, though, they wouldn't react to the little swim bait and you need to throw the big giant swim bait. So you have to experiment, and you can really dial it in because you can see the bass behavior really well with the Livescope. You can see how they swim, how they move, and that's something that's really key with Livescope.
I see one question right here. I'll answer it real quick. John Mango asked if I use 360 or side scan. On my boat, I've got the Helix 12 on the console and Helix 9 up front. Both have down imaging and side imaging. I never used them one single time last year in the Bassmaster Opens to catch a fish. I mean, I caught every fish that I weighed in the tournaments on straight 2D sonar. I never used any side imaging, down image at all to catch a bass my entire tournament season. So obviously, you can still compete with it. I mean, so no, I didn't use any of that at all, even though I had it. It's fun to look at. I mean, I love idling down the lake and looking at it, but I can't seem to equate catching fish with what I'm seeing on it. And, like I said, that's just comes from being old school power fisherman.
Yeah, honestly, guys, I find that I catch more fish just using old side scan, down scan than using Livescope 360. If you don't know how to use your side imaging, down imaging, buying Livescope and 360 is not going to help you hardly at all. And I'll get that here in a second because I saw some comments over here. One thing I want to talk about real quick, Randy. The last situation in which Livescope works really well is when you're on a blueback herring lake. Lake Murray, all those lakes on the East Coast, Lake Hartwell, Clark's Hill. If you have blueback herring in your lake, those fish will follow those herring around. And you actually saw when you were at the open there, Randy, over at Hartwell, when those fish get on blueback herring, especially in the late summertime and in the fall, if you don't have a live scope, you can't compete because those herring will move in and out of these areas really quickly. They'll move up and pull up on a brush pile here and then move out really fast, and then pull up on the next brush pile. What guys are doing is they have 75 brush piles or cane piles over here in this part of the country, 45, 50 cane piles marked. They just run up to the cane pile, drop the trolling motor, see if there's any herring around the brush. If there's not, they pick up the trolling motor and they run to the next spot. And then they keep going until they find a brush pile that has herring in it, and then they'll try a bunch of different baits. Once they get the right bait, they start catching them. So what I find, the three situations where those fish are really, where basically the live scope is a huge player, is when those fish are really suspended on shad, schooling offshore. That's usually when your water visibility is 3+ feet of visibility. And one question I did see here, one comment was that from Steve. He said, based on Johnny's comments, is Livescope good at 20 feet or less and not so good in deeper water? Not the case. You can catch fish on Livescope in super deep water. I've caught them as deep as 50, 60 feet of water on the Livescope. It's not just good for 20 feet and less. Sometimes those bait fish, like on Table Rock, there's bait fish right now, they're in 90 feet of water, and guys are catching them off their Livescope in 90 feet of water. It doesn't really matter if the bait fish don't need to just be up tall. They can be anywhere. But whenever those bass are related strictly to bait, they're not related to any sort of cover or the bottom, that's when the Livescope is deadly. But that doesn't come up that often. Next is when they have those bass are on smallmouth, and you have smallmouth bass. The third is when there's herring. And then one more example is helpful, Livescope is helpful, but maybe not mandatory, is when those fish are suspended in standing timber. We've seen Patrick Walters dominate Lake Fork when those fish are in standing timber, and he also did really well in the St. Johns River this last tournament, fishing standing timber with a jerkbait. When those fish are in standing timber, you can see which trees they're suspended in, see the depth they're in. So if your lake has standing timber in it, and you have clear enough water where those fish will push out in the middle of the lake on the timber, that Livescope can be really, really good. There's not standing timber in every lake, and those fish don't always get in that timber suspended on every lake. But if you have standing timber and you have bass suspended in that timber, that's also a deadly way to catch them. And I'm going to make a video about that here soon, Randy, on Beaver Lake.
Well, there's got to be some type of disconnect because, like, when I remember taking note when we were at the Lake Louisville tournament, the Bassmaster Open at Louisville, I got looking around. We were getting ready to take off that morning, and 95% of the boats that I could see around me, which was a ton of boats, all had Livescope on it. So why is it that you got a handful of these guys that dominate with this thing, and then everybody else, they just can't really figure it out? I mean, where's that disconnect coming in, even at the tour level professionals? Because not everybody, it's not like you can turn this thing on and automatically find these gold mines of suspended bass chasing shad everywhere. Why is it some people are so dominant with it and other people struggle with it?
So let me pull up a screen recording here, Randy, because actually I got a question too about that. People are a little bit confused. It was a question over here from Mike. He's asking, 1 minute you say you don't use Livescope to find fish, then 5 minutes later you said you use Livescope to find fish on table or find smallmouth on Table Rock. Which one is it? So to answer that question as clearly and succinctly as possible, I do not use Livescope to find fish, period, end of stop. Livescope is not a tool for finding fish or finding brush. Another question from Dwight was, should I buy Livescope because he says, should I buy Livescope because it takes me a long time to find brush? It takes me a long time to find brush piles. So is it worth the money to get a Livescope to find brush? No, do not do that. That is a bad idea. The easiest way to find fish, to find bait, to find brush is using your traditional 2D sonar side imaging, down imaging. When I'm finding my fish offshore, my first process before I ever drop the trolling motor is to idle for like 3 hours. I idle and idle and idle. And Dwight, or maybe it was Dustin, the reason it's hard to find brush piles is because a lot of times they're just out in the middle, and you might have to graph for 4 or 5 hours. And graphing for 4 or 5 hours for guys is not fun. It's not if you only have 1 day a week to fish, it's not easy to just drive around the middle of the lake until you find a bait ball like this. And a lot of guys don't even know where to look for the bait fish or to even do that. So I go to the lake, guys, and if I'm trying to catch fish on a Livescope or if I'm trying to catch fish on brush piles or whatever it is, I graph for hours with my side imaging and down imaging first. If you don't know how to use side imaging and down imaging, buying Livescope or 360 is completely worthless usually, because while you may be able to randomly stumble upon some fish, if you have to go, for example, Randy, if you were going to the lake here and you were trying to find fish on a Lake Murray with the Livescope, it's going to take you forever. If you're taking your trolling motor, even if you put your trolling motor on 10, to go around the lake on your trolling motor looking for shad, that would take years. But with my side imaging, down imaging, I can run into a creek, idle at 5 miles an hour for 30 yards, then run another, run 100 yards, graph this next section for 30, 40 yards, run in here, graph, and I can cover a ton of water. I can graph this entire creek in 2 hours with my big motor if I'm efficient and, use the right techniques and stuff, which I talk about in a lot of the seminars we do. But I'm never just dropping the trolling motor in the middle of a creek and just start randomly scoping around with the Livescope. I'm finding every single fish first with the down imaging, with the side imaging, 100% of the time. I never go out there and just try to find fish or brush with Livescope. That is super inefficient and a waste of time, honestly. So,
and I think that just what you said there, I think that's the number one mistake anglers make with Livescope. I mean, I think that they just get out there and they just put it down, roam around with it, and I don't think that they're doing their due diligence, with their other electronics on there. So from what I've seen, that's just what they're doing. I mean, unless I'm missing something with that.
I mean, honestly, I just think guys just don't graph enough, and they don't want to use their side imaging, down imaging. They think that the Livescope is this cure-all for offshore fishing. It's not. The guys who are really good and dominant offshore, they put in their time. The way I always explain it in seminars, Randy, is if you want to get an A in any college class, you need to study. You can't just go to the lectures randomly and sleep through class or, be on your phone, not pay attention in class, never study and get an A on the test. You need to go in, you need to study, you need to work. Same thing if you're playing a sport. You're not going to be able to go compete at football unless you go practice. You put your practice days in, you get in shape, you go to the gym. If you want to catch fish offshore, you have to do the same thing. You have to practice. And the way you practice offshore fishing is graphing. And it's not fun a lot of times for guys to go graph for 100 hours to learn their unit. And then even once they do that, when I go fishing, and you've seen this, Randy, I graph for half my day almost every single fishing day. I don't go to the lake to fish. I basically go to the lake to graph for 4 hours, then I fish for 4 hours after that. But I hardly ever just go and fish. If I'm out in the lake for 8 hours, I don't think I've fished more than 4 hours on the lake in 6 years. I always am just graphing, unless I'm specifically going to fish up shallow. If I'm fishing offshore, I'm graphing for at least half the day. And that's something guys just don't want to do. And guys are like, well, I have 1 day and I'm going to fish. Well, if you want to go to fish, that's great. If you want to go to catch, that's another story, especially offshore.
Yeah, I think there's two camps of anglers out there. There's the anglers, like you said, that just want to fish and they want to go out and fish. And then there's the anglers that like fishing offshore deep water. But here's the thing about fishing offshore. It's a commitment, because not only do you have to understand how your electronics work, how to set them up, how to read them, how to adjust them, and then you have to know what you see when you actually see it on your electronics, but you have to know if those fish are catchable. Are they bass? Are they positioned right on the structure? And the only way that you can really figure all that out, where it comes together, where you're putting fish in the boat, is through time on the water. And that takes a lot of time of idling around, experimentation, seeing something on your unit, whipping around and making a few casts in there. That's how you learn. It takes a big, long time commitment to learn that. And I think a lot of other people just want to be a chunking a spinnerbait down a lay down, so
Yep.
Which is fine. I mean, there's, you can do well either or both, but it's just, it just gives everybody another option of how they like to fish, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm making a video about this actually, Randy. It's going to go up on Thursday, so those who are interested. What I basically talk about in that video is like just kind of high level is if you're fishing down the bank, you can go down the bank here and you can find a ton of brush and laydowns and logs and bushes and whatever you want, and you have a million visible targets. But once you get out in the middle of the lake, you have no idea where any of the targets are. And everyone goes to the lake, they know if I'm going to go fish, I'm going to go fish down the bank on a target. I'm going to find a boat dock, a brush pile, or a laydown log, or riprap, or something. Well, in the middle of the lake, it's the same thing, except for you don't know what's out there, except for unless you have Google Earth, like in this example, where you can take the lake down. Once you get out in the middle of the lake, this is when the lake is drawn down, obviously. This is when you can actually start seeing what's down there. A brush pile, your stump rows, stuff like that. And that's what I'm doing. I'm basically doing the same thing guys are doing up shallow. It's just up shallow, you can see all the targets you're going to fish before you fish them. I don't have that luxury. I have to graph everything first to find the targets, drop my waypoints, cast down those spots. But at the end of the day, a brush pile offshore is the same thing as a laydown on the bank. It's just you can see the laydown with your eyes. The brush pile you have to take time to graph.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, one thing I wanted to do real quick, guys. Hopefully this is all making sense. We got so much more to talk about, Randy. This is a very hot topic, so I'm excited to keep going on this. One thing I do want to talk about with you guys really quick, though, and let me actually transition to this. This is what I was wanting. I want to talk about real quick is a couple things we got going on over at fishthemoment.com. So if you guys head over to our website, fishthemoment.com, and head over to the virtual seminars page. We have a couple upcoming seminars I'm really excited about. First one is How Weather Affects Bass. It's a seminar I'm going to be giving about how you can actually change your fishing throughout a given fishing day based on how the weather is changing. Whether you get cloud cover that rolls through, the current starts pulling a little bit harder, you get a cold front conditions that roll through, the water's dropping. There's a million factors that can affect the fish. I'm going to be coming up with some really amazing graphics for you guys that you can actually take to the lake and print off, and you can say, okay, in these conditions, this is the adjustment I need to make. Both lure choices, locations, areas, and we're going to be covering it for as many times of the year as possible. So it's going to be an amazing seminar. It's going to be focused on man-made lakes only, just because it's hard to talk about this for everything. But if you've ever struggled to make adjustments on the water to changing weather conditions, this is the seminar for you. This is going to be backed by a lot of tournament research I've done, as well as personal experience talking with Randy and other guys too. And I'm going to make it as comprehensive as possible. So if you are interested in the seminar, definitely check out one of these. This seminar here, How Weather Affects Bass. Again, it's going to be one of the best ones I've ever put on, along with that seasonal movement one. These are the two I've been excited about the most. So definitely check that one out. And then for those who want a little bit more specific on a specific technique, Randy and I are also going to be doing an advanced jig fishing seminar for spring bass. We're going to focus on pre-spawn bass, spawning bass, and post-spawn bass, how to fish jigs, how to modify jigs. Randy's going to give up some of his even more secret bait modifications he doesn't even talk about on his YouTube channel. I'll give you all of my secret tips on jig fishing, and hopefully you guys can learn some stuff on how to put fish in the boat and the jig. And a lot of this is going to be focused on like tournament jig fishing, so how to fish a jig to catch really good fish in tournaments, but also if you just want to catch big fish when you're fishing out for fun. And then other thing to check out, guys, are our lake breakdowns. Randy has been ripping out map breakdowns for spring. You get 40 GPS waypoints, and we have them on lakes all across the country. And we also have a bunch of breakdowns as well for these personal lake breakdowns, where Randy will actually break down any lake we don't have available on the website. So definitely check out all of these maps. There's a ton of them that we've been doing. Randy's been knocking them out. And so that is that. So that's all I got for that, Randy. I don't want to spend too much time plugging, but any other comments in that?
Yeah, definitely, guys. Check out those lake breakdowns, man. Those things, if you guys have a lake that you're wanting to learn, or if you have a lake that you fish a lot and you want some type of different insight to it, I mean, we spend a lot of time putting these things together, a lot of time and effort, a lot of study, a lot of data in there. So it's for what it would cost to put half a tank of gas in your boat, you can get one of these breakdowns, and it's going to save you a lot of time. So check them out.
Good deal. Awesome. So a couple questions I wanted to get to, Randy, before we jump into it. Some of the guys are, a little bit concerned about the electronics. They're not sure what to get, what to do. One thing you'll know, guys, I'm going to be doing a ton of videos on electronics coming up in the future here. I'm going to be talking about comparing all the different brands of fish finders. I'm actually going to get a setup where I can hook up every single brand of fish finder on my boat and switch them in and out really fast. So I'll compare every brand. I'm going to get every fish finder basically on Tackle Warehouse and just go and get them and share them with you guys, what we're doing. And then I'm also going to be, reviewing a lot of electronic applications. So if you like electronics, that's the place. This is the place to be. Fish the Moment. This is actually our Fish the Moment live channel. So if you want to check out our main Fish the Moment channel, head over to YouTube, type in Fish the Moment. That's where we put our highly edited content, where I do all my electronics instruction with graphics and all that stuff. This is just a live stream channel, so don't get confused. This is a separate channel, second channel. And we also have Randy's channel, Intuitive Angling with Randy Blockett. He doesn't talk about electronics at all, except for maybe to gripe about them a little bit. And he focuses more on shallow water, old school fishing, so check that stuff out too. But next thing I want to talk about, Randy, is situations when Livescope does not work. When should you avoid using Livescope, or when is Livescope not as effective as it could be? The first situation that I've found is that whenever bass are tight to cover or tight to an object, like the bottom of the lake, structure, stuff like that, Livescope is not nearly as effective. The reason for this is because Livescope is really helpful when those bass are roaming and moving around the lake. The example I showed you guys earlier is a Sonar recording where these fish were chasing shad out in the middle of the lake. However, when those fish are positioned tight to an object, a brush pile, a rock pile, you don't need to actually use Livescope technology. Can you see fish in brush piles on Livescope? 100%. I'll pull up a recording here of some of those situations where you can actually see fish in Livescope, or on the Livescope, on brush. But it's not necessary to use Livescope to catch those fish. The thing about Livescope I think the guys get confused about and they really struggle with is the fact that they feel like they need to use Livescope to fish offshore, period. That is not the case. So I got an example pulled up here. Here's a situation where we have some fish positioned on top of a point, on top of a rock pile with the Livescope. And you can actually see them over here on the right side of the screen. There's some bait fish high in the water, and there's some bass you can see kind of positioned up here on this point in like 10 foot of water. These fish were actually on the point, positioned around a rocky spot and also around some brush. And those fish, you could catch those without ever using Livescope. I could just throw a crankbait or a jig up there and catch those fish. And I actually graphed these fish first with my down imaging before I even made a cast up there. And you didn't need the Livescope because those fish were positioned right on the bottom of the lake. I can show you the exact spot where I caught them. Pull this away. I was fishing over here on Grand Lake when we were doing this, and these fish, you could see them, again, all over the graph, but I actually was able to see these fish on 360 imaging. I was able to see them on down imaging. I didn't even need to use those sonars to catch these fish, and the way these fish were positioned, they were up on top of this point right here, up in like 10 foot of water. So no need for Livescope in that situation, and honestly, I was getting distracted because there was a bunch of fish swimming out here randomly in the middle, and I was trying to cast at those fish as well, never got bit, and every time I would throw my jig or my crankbait back up on top of the point on that hard structure, those fish were up there, and I was able to get them to bite. And this is really something that happens a lot when those fish are in their summertime moods. When they're in the pre-spawn moods, they'll get tight to brush, tight to cover. And also when you have dirtier water, let's say 1 to 3 foot of water visibility, a lot of those fish offshore don't suspend as much. They'll get tight to brush, tight to rock piles. And the best example of this, Randy, is from this last tournament on Lake Eufaula we talked about earlier. Brian Thrift dominated the first 2 days of Lake Eufaula. Really, the first day he had like 40 pounds of bass on Major League Fishing Red Crest in Lake Eufaula, blew everyone out by double the weight. He has no Livescope on his boat. He just has 360 imaging, and he was able to graph a bunch of spots in practice, find groups of fish with his regular 2D sonar side imaging, and then he was using his 360 imaging to line up the spots, and he was catching all of his fish offshore with 360 imaging. He didn't even have spot lock. He has a 4-Trex trolling motor, no spot lock, and he's dominating everyone who has Livescope. You got Jordan Lee, Jacob Wheeler, who have the active target. They have the Livescope. They're great offshore fishermen. And Jacob struggled the first day and admitted that Livescope was the reason he struggled. He said that he was focused too much on the Livescope, and the 2 fish he ended up catching on the first day both came off a jig when he was fishing a hard target. Brian, on the other hand, was fishing jigs, shaky heads, swim baits around brush, around offshore hard spots, stuff like that. And that's how he's catching all of his fish. So what I find is like on Ufolo, where that water visibility is no more than 3 foot, when those fish get tight to that cover, Livescope will hurt you 95% of the time because those fish, they're not roaming around. You don't need the Livescope to see those fish there. As long as you're good with your side imaging or down imaging, you can find those fish in those brush piles, use the 360 or just use the old marker buoy method or waypoint method to hit those spots, and you can catch those fish effectively without ever using 360, ever using Livescope. Just the old school method of just dropping a waypoint, casting to the waypoint. That will catch plenty of fish offshore.
Well, here's the paradox that exists with Livescope, because you got Brian Thrift blowing the red crest away right now with just 360, and then you've got like Patrick Walters blowing the field away at the Elite Series tournament with the Livescope.
Yep.
And I'm guessing that Lake Fork is pretty similar clarity to the lower end of Eufaula. It might be a little bit clearer on there. So obviously, it's you can do well either or. I mean, there's times for the 360, there's times for the forward-facing sonar. My question is would Patrick Walters have blown that tournament out if he specifically used 360 on that particular area? And if Thrift didn't have 360 and just had the Garmin units, would he have done as well as he did? I mean, that's
what I'll say is Patrick Walters would not have been as effective in that tournament without the Livescope on Lake Fork, but Brian would be equally effective on his areas with Livescope. The thing with Livescope is that it allows you to catch a type of fish that's never been able to be caught before effectively. It's those fish that are suspended and roaming out in the middle of the lake. They're kind of just out randomly, either suspended on cover or suspended anywhere, but it's like they're just randomly roaming. The fish that Brian's fishing for are like brush pile fish. He could catch those fish without ever using any forward-facing sonar, but if he had Livescope, at least with Livescope, you can still see the brush, you can still line up your cast. But with the nice thing about 360 is you can spot lock if you want to spot lock, and it will work without you having to worry about where your nose of your boat's pointing. Or it just kind of helps you dial in your cast on the exact points of the brush pile. And that's just why Brian uses that, because it is a better tool for what he's doing. If you're just targeting a specific target, a brush pile, a rock pile, 360 is by far the best technology for that. But the thing is that Livescope or the live sonar gives you the ability to target those fish that you can't target otherwise, so suspended fish. The problem is that you only find those fish in those positions maybe 20% of the time, and especially in tournaments, it's very rare that you find those fish that are consistent enough to win a tournament, where they're consistently going like that. Patrick Walters was able to do it consistently, and he's probably one of the best anglers out there right now with the Livescope, if not the best on tour, and he might be able to find more situations than the average guy, but you don't need the Livescope to do what Thrift is doing, and you can see Thrift is kicking everyone's butt out there.
Well, it's an interesting study because, in my opinion, Thrift and Wheeler are the number 1 and number 2 anglers on the planet right now, not necessarily in any particular order. I think they're the 2 best anglers in professional fishing, and they both have completely different approaches. I mean, for Thrift not to have spot lock and not to have forward-facing sonar, and then Jacob has everything available to any angler that could possibly have on his boat, and they're both super successful. It's just sort of interesting how they approach that. I'd be curious to get Thrift's thoughts on that.
Yeah, good luck with that. I don't think Thrift shares much of anything. He talks on his...
Yeah, and here's the thing about it. Thrift, he has access to all that technology,
Yep.
Obviously, and he's very successful. So that's a choice. That's a conscious choice he made not to do that. And obviously, he made that choice because he felt that it may negatively affect his performance. So from that standpoint, I find that really interesting that he doesn't have that. I mean, considering the fact that he is such an incredible offshore angler. I mean, most of the success he's had has come offshore.
Yep.
So, that's just sort of an interesting study of approaches there.
And a lot of guys are asking here, Randy, they're saying, what's my opinion on Livescope versus 360? I'm going to be doing a detailed video on the main Fish the Moment channel, so I don't want to spoil all that in this live stream. I have some really cool graphics and ideas, things like that to share with you guys, so just be patient. I'm coming out with that video here as soon as I can. The ice just thawed off our lakes here in northwest Arkansas, Missouri, so I haven't been able to get out in the lake and film. But I'm going to be doing Livescope versus 360, having both on my boat, and kind of explain when one is better than the other, why, stuff like that. One thing I'm seeing here, guys, some guys are talking about how they are a little bit mad about electronics or how they used to go doing the old triangulation method. And honestly, Randy, when I started fishing offshore, that's how I did it too. I was fishing offshore when I was 12 years old, and I didn't have fancy graphs or anything. We would just find random brush piles out in the middle of the lake, and we would find them just by dragging jigs and stuff out from in front of shorelines, and we would hit with a Carolina, we would ever hit the brush, and then you would just line up your casts and like line yourself with 3 or 4 points, triangulate, and that's how we would catch them. We didn't even use, like, sometimes we would use the 2D, the old, like, I had a 2D sonar, black and white, Lowrance, and it just kind of showed you the bottom of the lake, and it was real, basic, but that's what I used for years and years and years, and then I would just use 2D sonar for years and years, and triangulation and marker buoy, stuff like that. That's how I learned to fish offshore for probably 5 or 6 years. And honestly, I feel like learning it that way has helped me become a 10 times better offshore fisherman, because now I know how to use the graphs to then make me more efficient. That's the thing that graphs do. They make you more efficient. They save time. It's already time consuming enough to find fish offshore, but it can make you more efficient and make you more consistent at catching fish offshore. That's what I find. They're not necessary by any means. You don't need anything other than a pole, and you can fish off the bank if you want to, but fishing from a boat, having the electronics, all that stuff, it makes you a little bit more efficient. But there are things that make you less efficient, which I think getting a Livescope or 360 and using that to find your spots, that's actually making anglers less efficient and will hurt you offshore rather than just taking the time to learn how to use that 9 or 12 inch unit you bought 3 years ago on your dash. Instead of going and buying a $3,000 Livescope unit, learn how to use that 12 inch unit that's $3,000 sitting on your dash. If you learn how to use that first, and if you can't catch fish with that unit you have on your dash of your boat right now, you're not going to catch any more fish offshore with the Livescope. I can guarantee you that, because you're just not going to put the time in to go find those fish. That's my thought on it, at least.
Yeah, it's interesting. You have to keep up with that technology, because I'll tell you guys a little bit of story here. Back in the early 90s, that's back when we just had flashers, no GPS. We had to triangulate everything with flashers.
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing that before anyone else did on Grand Lake back in the late 80s and early 90s. And there was about a 3 or 4 year period where I just dominated all the local tournaments down there fishing offshore, triangulating these spots with my sonar units. So I was on this cutting edge of this offshore structure fishing. But what happened as the technology had advanced and then you started getting 2D sonar, then you started getting GPS. I didn't adapt to that. I basically stayed with the old school stuff. I didn't adapt to the new technology. And before long, you at one time you were cutting edge on a technique, and then you get left behind. So with all this type of stuff, I mean, if you're going to get good at it, if you're going to get good like Jonny is with it, you have got to become a student of it. I mean, you have got to live it and breathe it. You've got to keep up with all the news on it. You've got to bounce off ideas. If you don't, you're going to get left in the dust, and you're going to get missed out on it.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent so many hours offshore, Randy, and it's to the point where I'm not that great at the shallow water fishing anymore, just because I don't spend any time up there. And it's just the point that I've gone all in on the offshore fishing because that's just what I enjoy. And it's not that I can't go catch them up shallow. I've done it in the past too. When I was tournament fishing a lot, I had to do both. You can't, if you're a tournament fisherman, you have to be able to do both. That's one of the reasons I like to not tournament fish anymore and just teach, because I like the electronics, I like the offshore fishing. That's just what I like to do. And it doesn't always, when you go offshore fishing, guys, it's not like you're always going to go catch them when you fish offshore. There are times when the shallow bite is better than the offshore bite, and that's just due to seasonality, water clarities, things like that. But for me, I always still go to try to find them offshore because that's what I enjoy. That's what I think is fun. But a lot of guys don't think driving around in the middle of the lake is very fun. I have 900 hours on my engine, Randy, from driving my boat around in circles. So I have a lot of hours on my engine, driving. And, that's the way I do it. And I think a lot of guys just don't want to do it that way, and that's fine. You just have to kind of balance that out.
But here, here's the addictive thing about offshore fishing, and you know very well this, Jonny, or Livescope or anything else, is when you're fishing offshore, you have the potential to bust those mega bags, those giant bags of fish, 30-pound plus bags, schools of giant fish. Where as somebody like myself that focuses on shallow water power fishing a lot, I'm after isolated rogue big fish. If I catch one 8 or 9 pounder in a day to go with my limit, that is like gravy. But if you're fishing offshore, you may always run into that gold mine of a school of big ones like there that you don't have when you're fishing shallow water. So while you may have more consistency shallow water, more tournaments get won in shallow water, you take yourself out of the potential to catch those, once in a lifetime sacks if you don't fish off the bank, because that's where those fish live. You cannot catch those mega bags up on the bank. It just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, and that's the thing for me. That's where the gold mine is. And I don't really ever go fish multiple days to go graph and stuff. But like I love that feeling when I pull up on the school of fish and I catch 7 fish on 7 casts and 3 of them are 4 to 5 pounders. Like that to me makes it all worth all the hours of driving around. And it's like for me, it's that hunt. I love the hunting and finding the fish. The catching them is awesome too, but like the hunting, that's in like understanding the bass behavior and trying to outsmart the fish. I kind of think I used to play chess when I was younger. I was actually ranked 3rd in the state of Wisconsin for junior chess for middle school chess. I actually won the Arkansas State Chess Championship when I was in 6th grade out of all the 6th, 7th, 8th graders. So I was really good at chess, and that's kind of like how I think about fishing is that it's a chess match. You have to outthink the fish. You have to plan 3 steps ahead. And electronics allow you to get a lot of extra information. You learn where the bait fish are, water temperature. You've taken the water clarity, all the weather conditions, and I take all those elements in to find the fish. And that's really something that I enjoy doing. And if you guys are interested in learning a little bit more about how weather and all that affects fish, I am going to be doing a seminar over on fishthemoment.com. Just head over to our website, fishthemoment.com, and if you go to the virtual seminars page, I'm going to be doing a seminar on how weather affects bass. And we're going to talk about how wind, cloud cover, lake level, current, cold fronts, every factor, both weather and also kind of lake conditions, how they affect bass and how they change them day to day, week to week, and how you can adjust your strategies, both baits, presentations, areas, all those things. And I'll be talking both shallow and offshore on this as well to give you guys a really good understanding of how to change your approach. And a lot of times, like, with the weather, should you be fishing shallow or should you be fishing offshore? Should you be fishing a moving bait or a slow bait? All those things will be answered in the seminar. And we'll also be doing an advanced jig fishing seminar for spring bass. If you ever struggled to catch fish on a jig, this is the seminar for you. We're going to be doing modification tips. We're going to be talking about the best retrieves, the best areas to catch big fish in the spring, pre-spawn, spawn, post-spawn on a jig. Randy and I will both be talking about that. And then also, we did have a question here on the lake breakdowns. We are often, obviously, our lake breakdowns, 40 GPS waypoints. We also have these personal lake breakdowns. And Randy can only do so many of these a week. He has to spend like 4 to 5 hours making sure they're really good. And so we offer these personal lake breakdowns every Monday. And they usually sell out within the first 2 or 3 hours of them being posted. And every Monday, we refresh them. So check back, and then we do have Randy dropping new lakes every single week. So you can always just search your lake here to make sure you're not missing it, and you'll be good to go. So just another plug on that. Hopefully you guys are enjoying. And another thing just to call out, guys, remember, this is the second channel for Fish the Moment. This is our Fish the Moment live channel. We have our main Fish the Moment channel where we do all of our highly edited content. Those videos go up on Fish the Moment, the main channel. This channel has like 3,000 subscribers, so actually if you're here from Fish the Moment, go subscribe to this channel too. The main channel has like almost 90,000 subscribers, so you can just look at the subscriber total if you're confused on which channel is which. But that's where we have our like 20 to 30 minute fully edited videos. I spend 20 to 30 hours a week working on those videos. Then the live channel is just for live streams like this. So yeah, Randy, that's basically what we had to cover today with the 360 with the Livescope. We do have a bunch of questions rolling in here, but one question they had is, when are we fishing some tournaments together, Randy? That's the first question.
Yeah, Johnny and I are planning on fishing some of the Joe Bass team tournaments at Stockton Lake Division this summer. I think they get started up. I think there's one in May, but most of them are in the summertime. So we're going to get a chance to see Johnny's offshore deep water fishing skills in action on the Joe Bass circuit this year.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. That'll be fun, and it'll be kind of
back of the boat netting most of the day. So shallow water fishing, man.
No, we'll be good. I'm excited about that. I know we're going to be hammering them, and then we're going to try to do some more team tournaments and stuff. I like the team tournament format because it allows me to kind of focus a little bit more on the filming too. That's the one thing guys always ask me: why am I not fishing tournaments? I fished a tournament, guys, a few weeks ago or a few months ago. First day of the tournament, I had like 4 fish for 11 pounds, broke off a couple fish, and after that first day, I realized that I was spending so much time focused on the cameras and getting a story and trying to make the video that I wasn't focused on fishing. And if I had landed all the fish I hooked, I'd have been like second place in this. You know, it was all the locals. It was this. Basically the pro. It was that there was that old circuit that guys used to fish. It was the individual tournament series up here. They fish on Table Rock, like the Pro Am or the Pro.
Central Pro Am,
Central Pro Am. It was the last one of those I ever had, and it was on Table Rock. And I had 11 pounds. I think it was like 15th place out of 60 guys the first day. And I lost like a 3 or 4 pounder. It would put me in second. And after that first day of the tournament, I just realized I was struggling trying to, figure out how to choose the camera work and the videos and the other stuff. So I just kind of cashed it in the second day. I just realized this tournament fishing wasn't really for me because it was messing with my head. It's one of those deals where when you're fishing tournaments, guys, you have to be all in. You have to be 100% on focus on fishing, focus on your strategies. If you're having to worry about camera batteries and, did I get that angle right on my cast or things like that, it's a nightmare. So I'm just going to stick to making the videos. I feel like I could go and do pretty well in tournaments if I wanted to, but I feel like I can provide a lot more value to you guys going and teaching because there's already a million tournament videos out there. Everyone fishes tournaments. You can watch a million professional anglers in tournaments. That information's already out there. I feel like I can do better spending 20 to 30 hours editing videos and producing them. So that's what I'm going to do. That's kind of what's happening there. But yeah. And then Randy will be doing tournaments as always too. So you'll be able to check out Randy fishing.
Yeah, I see a couple comments here. We have my first tournament of fishing is next week at Lake of the Ozarks, the Toyota series up there. I'm fishing. There's only 3 Toyota series. There was Ozarks, Grand, and Dardanelle. So I jumped in those. So Lake of the Ozarks is going to be nice and chilly next week. That water is still frozen over up there a bunch, I think, right now. So it's going to be low 40s water probably up there next week.
Yeah, that's going to be tough. I don't know what you're going to do. I know you wanted to go throw a big spinnerbait up shallow, but we've had 70-degree days. It was 70 degrees here today, Randy, so maybe that water will warm up quicker than we think.
Well, it's going to be, for me, I'm going to be throwing the jerkbait up there in that cold water. So we're going to see how the jerkbait does against the Alabama rig guys because Alabama rig's legal in that tournament. I'm not going to be fishing it, so we'll see how the jerkbait holds up against that.
Oh, man, you got to throw it, Randy.
I'm going to have a bunch of them with me.
Got to get after it. Man, awesome. Seeing a bunch of other questions here. A lot of these questions I'm going to answer in upcoming videos, guys, so I'm not going to get into it too much. I'm going to be doing a ton of electronics videos over the next few weeks, so don't worry about that. I'll be answering all the questions about Livescope 360, which is which, and hopefully that will help make sense. And then couple guys are asked, or one, who is this? Let me find this comment. This is a good one. Where'd that one go? Oh, it's from Steve. He says, Randy is killing you on the bait modification updates. He said, you have the electronics, but Randy has the bait modifications. You need both to catch bass. That's 100% true, guys. What I always say is if you're not fishing around fish, it doesn't matter how you modify your bait. You could have the perfectly weighted bait in the perfect color with the red dot on the gill and shaving the bill and, putting a BB or taking out the silent, whatever it is. If you're not around the fish, it doesn't make a difference. You're basically, if you're throwing into water where there's no fish, you could have the coolest modified bait ever. It doesn't matter. And so that's how I think about it. And I always think about where the fish are, bass behavior, stuff like that first. That's why I don't really talk about bait modifications because I just don't even really mess with it. I spend so much of my fishing mental power on the other stuff that I don't have time for the modifications. But I know with your style, Randy, it is really, really important.
Well, yeah, and that is so true but you've got to be around the fish to catch them because if you're around the fish, you can catch them on the bait that may not be the best bait. But since I'm a shallow water specialist, I'm looking for that extra 1 or 2 bites a day, and by tweaking, having some modifications, not only does it give me a mental boost that I'm doing something my competitors aren't, but also a lot of times I really believe it'll get you that one or two extra bites a day. And in tournament fishing, that's what it's all about. You're just basically talking one or two bites a day that makes the difference between having a good finish and not even getting a check.
For sure. That's a big deal. I mean, guys are saying that that you know better than me, Randy. So I guess I should just shut up and stay in the corner. No, I'm just.
They're saying your bill's too flat on your hat, Johnny.
I know. I'm my bill's too flat. I use too many electronics. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just gonna leave. Why am I even here?
I call it a flat biller, do you?
Oh my gosh. I used to wear flat bills on, like, real flat bills. This isn't even a flat bill. This is just a regular hat. Like, it's got some curve to it. I don't know. But,
I had a bill on one time, and it said that everybody said that I looked 10 years younger with it. So, man, should I start wearing one now or what?
I mean, I got some real flat bills if you guys wanted me to go back to, like, the, where you could lay, you could balance something on there, but this has got some curve to it. I don't know. I'm also 26, guys, so I know a lot of you guys are more old school. I'm not that old, so I'm trying to keep it a little bit more youthful here, and that's the good thing, Randy. We got that balance between the two, because you really need both. I mean, that's the thing is, like, I probably should spend more time on the bait modifications and all those different aspects, because it would help me in a lot of situations put extra fish in the boat. But I'm not fishing tournaments, so I don't really worry about it as much. Where with Randy, you probably could benefit from using electronics a little bit more, but that's just not really your style. So there's both perspectives are helpful, guys, to pay attention to. And also, like, if you don't like me talking about electronics, there's always Randy's channel over at Intuitive Angling with Randy. And if you like the electronic stuff, check out Fish the Moment. We kind of have it all for you. So, here's my thought. Any comments there, Randy?
That's true, man. We got a little bit of everything. And if you want to be a well-rounded, versatile angler, I don't think there's anything that's out there that we don't cover.
Yep.
Because Johnny's covering all the offshore mid-depth, all the, bass behavior, movement type thing. I'm giving you techniques on specific stuff, shallow water applications. So I think between the two of us, we can answer about any questions you guys may have.
For sure. And what we try to do, guys, we just tell you what our experience is. I always try to make sure I tell you guys when I don't know what I'm doing, because I don't know everything about bass fishing by far, and I know Randy does the same thing, even though he's been on tour for 30 years, and super humble on that, Randy, which is awesome. And that's what we try to do, guys. We don't want to give you a bunch of fluff. We just tell you what we hear and think, and try to back it up with data and fish catches. And that's what Fish the Moment's all about. We're not here to say, oh, look at this bait that someone told us to do, or like, let me make up spots we're catching fish. Like, we share everything we do. Here's the fish, here's where we caught them, here's the sonar recordings. If you guys care to believe it, that's on you, but like, that's how I've always thought about my channel, and that's how you do it too, Randy. You just share what works and what you and that's all we can do.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing about it is, like, there's so many different ways to catch bass, and there's so many different things to work that, I think one of the big things, if we can give you guys a foundation to build on, and then you can put your own ingenuity and your own creativity and your own twist onto it, because that's how new techniques and new approaches are developed. It's basically just improving and modifying a certain technique or certain style. And I've learned so much just like watching my co-anglers fish, doing stuff that they had no idea what they were even doing, that they would try something that I wouldn't try. And as a result, I learned about it. So you never stop learning. I mean, it doesn't matter how long you've been fishing, how long you've been doing this. It doesn't matter how much success you've had. Everybody's still a student of the sport. Johnny and I are students. We always will be. Everybody else is too. So we're just trying to help point you guys in the right direction and avoid some pitfalls we made.
For sure, we've made plenty of pitfalls. That's for sure. I'm excited though, guys, just to keep the content rolling out to you, and we're making these the live stream channel here, Fish Moment Live. We're doing quick clips every single After every single live stream, we'll make quick clips that we'll post of the live stream, so you guys can watch like 10 to 15 minute little segments if you want to rewatch or re-listen to anything. We have the main Fish Moment channel. We post there every 7 a.m. Thursday Central Standard Time. So check out the main Fish Moment channel. Leave a like on this live stream. If you're here, there's 240 of you. Leave a like on the video. It helps get this live stream out to people. And also, just follow us on all of our channels. Subscribe to all the channels on Fish Moment, Randy's channel, and on the Fish Moment Live channel. One thing I see, Randy, on both our channels is that we don't have that many people actually subscribe to our channel. Like 35% of our viewers are subscribed. The other percentage is 65% are not subscribed, but they watch every single video. So if you guys haven't done that before, it's free to do. Sign up for a Google account. You don't need to use the Google account for anything else. Just subscribe to Fish the Moment, and then you can forget it. It takes like 2 minutes, and it really helps us out. So just to call it there. But anything else, Randy, you got for the viewers before we sign off?
I just, I've seen a couple comments here, Johnny, that some guys saying that we've got twice the viewers on our live stream that Bass University or Kevin Van Dam's channel's got. And I just want you guys to know that we appreciate that, man. That's for Johnny and I to basically have the #1 podcast out there right now, that's because of you guys joining in on us. And, we don't take that for granted. Johnny and I talk back and forth every day how fortunate we are to have such a passionate, loyal group of guys that want to hear what we got to say. So thank you very much for joining in. It's much appreciated.
Yeah, guys, we really, really appreciate it. And we just, we try to put out content as consistent as we can. We bust our butts. We're working, 70, 80-hour weeks at times. Randy's got kids, and I'm just trying to, grind out as much as I can to help you guys catch fish. And that's really all we try to do. We try to put out high-quality content. We don't ever want to cheat you guys. That's what we always, Randy and I always talk about is we're going to tell you the truth and give it to you the way it is. And if you sign up for any of our seminars or whatever, we put a ton of time and effort to make them high quality. And we're not going to reuse content from the live streams. We're trying to make it so that you guys get really high quality stuff. That's just the way I like to do stuff. That's how I've always been, and that's how Randy is too. So, really appreciate all you guys who are watching, and really appreciate all the support. And one thing they said, Randy, is that the guys who aren't subscribed are their closet Jonny and Randy YouTube viewers. They don't want to subscribe because they don't want everyone to know who they are. All the tour pros out there not trying to. There's no tour pros that follow my channel, so I can tell you that much. None of their channels follow Fish the Moment. I've looked before, so who knows? Maybe they're watching, maybe not. Good deal. Well, anyways, Randy, any last comments before we sound off for the night?
Yeah, again, guys, just thanks for joining in tonight. Appreciate it. And like I said, we'll be back next Thursday. With Johnny and I, we'll discuss it and pick a really good topic. And if you guys got some topics that you'd like to hear, feel free to drop us a note on fishthemoment.com, and we may talk about that too.
For sure. And we're going to do another post, I think, next live stream, where we're actually going to post on social media, on Randy's social media, my social media, and we're going to ask for you guys to actually leave questions, and we'll answer some of those questions on the next live stream. So we'll actually take 5 questions from our social media pages and give you like a 15 to 20 minute answer on that question. So definitely go on there. We're going to make the posts on our social media pages. Make sure you comment on those. And then also, if there's a comment that you really like and you want that topic talked about, just comment on it and say agree or like it or something, so we know that that's the topic you want us to cover. And we'll come with graphics, and I'll try to have some Navionics, Google Earth, Sonar recording stuff to give you guys as much context as I can, and Randy will pull up his screen as well. So just go over to our social media pages at Fish the Moment or at Randy Blockett, Professional Angler, and we'll be posting that over there. So anyways, thanks again, guys, for for joining us for the live stream. Really, really appreciate everyone in here. There's 230 people who are still here listening to me talk on, so always appreciate you guys listening, and best luck on the water. Stay safe out there. Hopefully your lakes are thawing out like ours, so you'll be able to get back on the lake, and we'll see you guys next Tuesday, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, as always. Have a great night.